4, 3, 2, 1. I do believe that we are live. So Sam, it is so good to see you. I know we're running a couple minutes late there. I just got too excited to catch up with you.
No
How are you doing
worries.
today, man?
Yeah, pretty good. I'm actually in a very good mood. We had got this massive thing where we're preparing for the community, and I'm really excited to be able to share with it as soon as possible. So
Well, I
yeah,
know
pretty good.
I know that you're a man who moves fast, and I'm
Yeah.
definitely going to dive in more to learn about not just Imbue as a network, but what you guys have coming up this next
Mm,
quarter. And I know it's been a wild couple of months. But before diving into that, I guess I wonder, as an icebreaker, I've always wanted to know something about you, Sam. I
go
can
for
tell
it.
that you're a man who's got a past. I want to know about younger years, Sam.
Mm,
Tell me about your start. Let's say college, for example.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
What's something that you did back in your school days that you would never do now, but was totally normal to you back then?
Oh wow. Okay. That's it was normal back then, but I wouldn't do now.
You would never do now.
Oh, okay. Let's have a look. I was a troublemaker, I think, back in school. I used to be quite argumentative in my classes, always trying to prove the teacher wrong, for example, or ask them really difficult questions. I don't think I would do that now, especially in tech, because more often not, I'm speaking to people who are not very tech focused. So I think it's not a nice move, but as a teen and as someone in school, yeah, I loved tricking the teachers. I was just so horrible to teach. I think I would hate teaching myself when I was younger.
So is it one of those things they say? Does the apple not fall far from the tree? Or do you think that that's coming back,
Oh
karma
yeah,
wise?
absolutely. I already see it with my girls. I really see it that they do not respond well to authority. So
Man.
it's definitely coming back. Yeah,
I'm worried for myself then because I've heard that it typically comes right back around, and
yeah,
I'm not sure how to prepare for that. But
yeah.
with that in mind, man, the way that it can be intimidating for anybody. I mean,
Mm,
technical and non-technical. I remember at the blockchain conference in Miami, there was a number of devs that have been in blockchain and Web3 for
mm,
years and
mm.
still feel very much a beginner. So when it comes to overcoming that intimidation, I know you specialize not just on the technical and product creation standpoint, but the finance and the investment side.
Mm.
What is it that people are going through whenever they're first diving into this massive blue ocean water of Web3? What do
Yeah.
you find is the biggest intimidation for Web2 folks?
I think it's the fear of the unknown. Personally, from the conversations I've had with people, trying to convince them. Like I talk about Web3 all the time. If I jump on spaces or face to face with friends, it's always like the whys. People are like, why? And to try and understand the allure. Like someone I went for dinner 2 days ago to meet a friend I haven't seen in like 8 years, and he's like, why don't you sell Web3 to me? Like, and he's a dev. He's a very comfortable dev who
Yeah.
devs are normally
One of those sell me this pen type moments.
yeah, 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 pretty much. He was. But I think a lot of the time they might feel overwhelmed, right? And when you're coming into such a new space, there is a massive fear of the unknown. And I think we're lucky in the IT industry because we're so used to jumping into the fear of the unknown because we're constantly learning new languages, we're learning new ways of working, we're learning new technologies. But you sometimes forget that other people in other industries don't have to constantly retrain themselves, right? So it could be very daunting. Right, this is the very first time they're retraining, and they don't have the numbness you get when you're constantly doing it. You realize there's nothing to fear. So what? It's okay. IT is the only industry in the world that has fail fast as the motto, right? You don't see a pilot that keeps crashing before
Ooh,
takeoff.
that's a
Be a
great
pilot for
example.
very long, right? Or a heart surgeon that keeps killing their patients. But IT, we want to fail fast, right? That's the end goal. It's a motto. So I think that's the most daunting thing for people coming into the space, the fear of the unknown, fear of failure.
It makes a whole lot of sense on why they think differently. I guess I wonder because it makes me think these are tech folks we're talking about who even in Web 2, it's someone that's a developer would likely feel comfortable enough navigating one language versus another. Sure, there's kind of some nuance will change, but that's pretty standard. But if we're talking about mass consumers, it's usually change is quite violently responded to. So I guess I say that because I hear, of course, we even talk so much about mass adoption and that mass adoption point. But to be frank, it looks like we still need to work on the early adopters and the innovators. So I guess I wonder what is it that you see? Because I know you've got a lot of projects that you've looked at. How could you integrate into your platform? So what is it that you think the early adopters, the folks who are already in Web3 consideration phase, what are the differences between the thoughts that those folks might have versus what somebody who is that mass adoption that we kind of talk about so much, yet it seems like we're a little bit early for that.
So it's different paradigm shifts between or different thought processes between these two people. The first one is people who are already in Web3. More often than not, they're invested in a particular coin, and unfortunately, the ones who are very rarely have a open mind to discuss alternatives. And there's a reason for that. It's because they financially invested in this particular project. So any criticism of it or even any feedback to improve on it sometimes gets responded to badly because it feels like you're attacking this thing I've invested in. And that's why when I go on spaces, I always talk about Web3 collaboration. What's really interesting is when you take that away, when you take away the fact that this is something I'm financially incentivized in, and what I try and do is I try and approach convincing people about Web3 or different technologies in an A/B approach, right? I'm going to try this and then try that and then look at, the feedback. I'm A/Bing my processes of trying to convince people. So when I find someone who's very attached to this particular technology, and then I approach it from the way of, look, interoperability benefits both you and I, because through Metcalfe's law, the users of the network squared is a value. So if we're able to bridge these two networks together, then both you and I win, because now the value of our whatever we're holding both go up squared, right? So that's how I'm currently approaching it. It's like focusing on interoperability and collaboration rather than, hey, come over to our chain, or you come. It's get rid of the tribalism that's happening on Web3. That's how I would convince someone who's already on it. Someone outside it, that is a completely different conversation, because you have to have the why. You have to understand how and why you need to get into Web3, and the why of it could be, how can you improve their lives, right? How does this impact their life? And if you can't answer it, or if the answer is, if you buy this token, you're able to stake it for X amount of APY, that's not enough of a why to convince someone to actually shift into Web3.
Yeah, well, it sounds like a big part of that is someone in the consideration phase. They probably have they identify one way or another, whether that's through their wallet or through their community. And outside of that, it's something where, well, someone has to have a reason to even begin investing. I forgot to mute my phone. So I guess, what is it then? Because you and I think a big part of why we've connected over the time we've known each other is that Polkadot ecosystem, interoperability approach, knowing that there's not just a power in numbers, but there's a power in the collective innovation available within a community. So I wonder, because you've been a part of projects big and small, from a community standpoint, what do you see is it that, I guess, let's call it, makes a community effective versus just, wide reaching or loud, let's just say. I think we've both seen environments that people can identify with a concept without fully understanding the value that it might provide. Yet when you're on the capital side, you've got to look at it from a value standpoint, down to the definition of Imbue, being able to add value to something. So when you're looking at communities in general, where do you see that value comes from?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to the community, I think projects always say that communities are the most valuable asset that we have. right? And they say that because, that's how they grow their audience. That's how you grow your network. But unfortunately, I don't always see the actions of projects reflecting their most important asset being the community, right? So at Imbue, we're defining what the standard should be for accountability and transparency. And we want to imbue that into our community because we want to raise awareness of what accountability looks like and what transparency looks like. So then by doing that, when they spread awareness to other communities, they can hold their projects accountable and they can ask for the transparency that is to be defined in Web3. That's the only way we'll move towards that mass adoption, because just having a place filled with just speculation is not going to convince the new wave of people coming in. So to me, a healthy community is one that actually questions. It questions what people are building, because that's the only way we get critical feedback and actually build. So absolutely, hold your team, that the community you're in, accountable. So if someone in the community is abusing someone else, it's up to you to call it out and say, no, that's wrong. And we see this with so many projects in this space, who sometimes people are like, no, I'm going to blindly follow what this person is saying, regardless of whether I agree with it or not, because now again, I'm financially incentivized by this thing. I wanted to succeed, and I am going against my better judgment. I'm not saying all communities are like that, but I see that, and that's a problem. So we have to be truthful with ourselves, because at the end of the day, if you really take a massive step back, the crypto community as a whole is a minority, right, compared to the rest of the world, right? So there's no point.
It's a humbling reminder.
Yeah, it's not, there's no point of this tribalism. Absolutely, root out the bad actors, right, and hold other communities accountable, because that's how we grow.
Man, well, that's a great way to be able to break down, and especially having looked at multiple communities from the perspective of yourself on both technical as well as the leadership side of things, and really focusing on the action accountability. I think I'm shooting in the dark here, but I know we're both pretty data oriented, and I've gathered a lot of anecdotal data. It seems typically it comes down to the leadership and then the personality and character, and I guess the general expectations that are set from the top. I forgot who said it, but there's a funny joke, or maybe it's a meme, tough to tell these days, but it says the bottleneck is typically at the top of the bottle. And I guess I wonder, when it comes down to connecting those dots between a humble action taker of a leader, and then also the success of a project from an investor's standpoint, what are those cues? What are those signs that you found are, of course, it could be a long list of potentialities, but what do you find is at least a filter to be able for investors to better navigate these waters, to tell the difference between those less effective communities, let's just say, versus those who are really taking action and doing something?
Yeah, so I guess the things that you can look out for really depend on your skill set, right? So for example, if you're a dev, you're able to, if you want to see if this is a legit project, look into GitHub, see if if there's actually working code and stuff like that. If you're not a dev, you can have a look at what the values of the project, what they're saying their ethos is, what their vision, and how close are their actions toward that vision, right? Are they actually being held accountable? And also, we're in a space that there's just so much changing in this particular space, and it's so new. Mistakes will happen. I say this because we have to allow founders to make some mistakes, because these things happen. And I'd like to see how teams, when they do make mistakes, do they own up to it, or do they come up with an excuse and actually put the blame somewhere else? And that's really something you should look out for, right? It's someone who would say, from a leader's perspective, someone who can accept, fold, and grow is someone I would be far more likely to listen to than someone that won't, because we are in a new space, and because we can and absolutely will make mistakes. All these hacks that happen, right? On I say hacks, they're exploits. I want to see how the team respond to that. You know, do they come to their community and say, look, this was a mistake or of an oversight or something like that? Hold yourself accountable, own the issue that was faced, and then that's how you move forward. So yeah. What on the other side, like there's so many people that say you have to be really crazy to build in the Web3 space, just because the amount of abuse that you might get from a community because the token price hasn't gone up, for example, right? Or something you have no control over. You could be constantly shipping stuff. You could be constantly pushing updates and you're absolutely innovating in the space, but you're still getting abuse, right? So the effect on mental health cannot be overstated. It's absolutely a mess. Yes, founders can win, but more often than not, they don't, right? There's so many failures in the space.
They've definitely made the glass on the way.
Yeah, and to be willing to just put your reputation on the line and constantly try to build, that's a mark of someone who wants to build a better future for Web3, and I commend them for that.
That's powerful, and I love the way that your insights are so practical. It really shows the way that you're able to navigate both of those mindsets, because it's almost like what you've got there are the bones of what could be that ideal archetype, where the same way one might be looking for a target market to sell a product, just like fidget spinners or yoga pants or something. Here in the Web3 space, while we are small, there are different characters that we're after, and there's some that are much more favorable towards success than others. And
yes.
I don't usually hear such a pragmatic breakdown. And one of the things that really stood out to me was the connection between a leader's ability to take responsibility for mistakes, but also their willingness to accept that mistakes are inevitable. Now that's a bit of a balancing board to define, because it is something where there's what level of what is the word, where self-deprecation versus the point of it being something that a person is just open. And I don't think there's a direct and straight answer to that, though. One of the things that I would wonder then is on the community side of things, how is it that individual people can I guess, of course we can only control our own actions, but there's got to be there's something that comes from this animosity that comes up when people are, maybe they invested too much, and we all say don't invest more than you're willing to lose, but maybe
but that's not the case anymore.
So what do you think is it then that is that root core piece that is something that a person could look at in themselves, if perhaps, from what I've seen, the people who can be the most toxic online don't usually realize they're the toxic ones because they're comparing themselves to somebody else. So I'm interested to see, what do you think that comes from, that maybe a person could understand how we can be more productive as a community, I guess, individually?
Yeah, I mean, I find that when a conversation gets quite toxic, or you feel like you're not being heard, I would try to move to a different medium of communication. So, for example, if I'm texting and it's somebody, I feel like this conversation is broken down, let's try talking. So I would, for example, open up a voice AMA, right? And allow everyone to come and talk and give everyone a chance to speak and try to resolve conflict that way, or resolve toxicity. And then, for example, and these things can happen within the community, it can happen within the internal team. Be like this, let's identify the root cause of why you're feeling this thing. And is it something that we can resolve? And what action points can we take? As long as it's clear that both parties want to move to a good place, or want to actually reach a better position, then what's important is their willingness to communicate. Toxicity happens. It's okay. You have to accept that it happens when you're dealing with finance, right? But it's the willingness to communicate. And it's, if you're in a situation where you feel like you're doing everything you can to bridge that gap and reach a point where you're able to communicate effectively, and another party isn't, then at that point, that's when I raise the question is, do you not feel that you're being toxic and not given an alternative? You don't want to open up a bridge.
Interesting, Sam. Because it reminds me of our mutual friend, Bull Sander.
Yeah.
He's to this day, I'd likely say,
Yeah, yeah.
best ambassador, the best community leader
Absolutely.
I've
Yeah,
seen.
yeah. Sanders amazing. Like not only is he patient, like
Yeah.
that's really what when I joined when I joined so many communities and my first interaction with Kyan, and I saw Sander being so patient and so willing to hear other people's frustrations. When I went to other communities, they were just banning people left, right, and center. Like, we don't want to even give you an opportunity to criticize us. It's like a democracy versus a dictatorship. That's how it felt to me. And yeah, it's something I really admire about him. He's definitely one of the best people in the space I know.
Well, I know he's definitely been like the I guess the bar by which I set and look at what relative level of I guess effectiveness is the best word I can think of for now, but of a community. Well, this is powerful, Sam, because one of the things I was interested in as I was seeing this amazing growth potential that Imbue has. I mean, the literal just hundreds of billions that are in the capital space, which much of it, unfortunately, there's entire divisions that is directly set towards analyzing and quantifying the exact value of something and the relative risks behind it. And from what I'm seeing, you guys have quite frankly flipped that upside down, the entire business model, by putting the previously secret processes of operations of the full, exact breakdown of what someone is wanting to do. Usually this could be very secretive. Well, in Web3, it's almost like you have to share. Here's what we're going to build. Here's the technology we're going to use. And here's what we think it will take from a resource standpoint. I say that because it's a bit of a reversal, yet from an efficiency standpoint, it seems like there's quite a number of advantages that makes it to where, while yes, it can be scary going into this uncomfortable way of raising capital, but what advantages have you found so far that makes this a superior manner of not just raising capital, but also of scaling a business?
Yes. So first of all, it's the decentralized aspect of it. You cannot overstate that. Now with Web3, anyone in the world, you're a farmer in Africa, a small business owner in Southeast Asia, a villager in South America, they might have all the resources they need to succeed except funding, right? And they don't have any form of access to funding. And now Web3 comes in and says, you know what, we have a lot of funds here and we can help you. And, we believe that what you have has a good return on investment. So that's a unique selling point that the Web2 world just doesn't have because of all the red tape and bureaucracies. But from another aspect, the VCs, investors, they bring in a lot of value. They don't necessarily just bring in funding, but they bring in a lot of value apart from funding. But sometimes projects just don't need all the connections that VCs have, especially at the early stage. I might be like, look, I just need funding to hire the people. I don't need connections or partners, or I need to actually see if this thing can be built. And unfortunately, the terms you get when you're early stage, the terms you get when you're, go out with angel investors and VCs and doing your early seed rounds are not necessarily the most generous compared to when you go directly to the public, right? And that is really the main unique selling point. You're like, okay, yes, you might be uncomfortable going down this road because it's completely open, but at the same time, you're able to raise at much favorable terms because you're going directly from the people who believe in you the most. You get a bigger cut and they get a bigger cut, and you're literally getting rid of the middleman, just like DeFi is trying to do with traditional finance, we're trying to do with VCs. So you might get community members that actually give you those connections that you need, right? Or get you in touch with the right people that you need to, because there you can be, they believe in you the most. So that's one of the elements I think that sets Imbue apart from something like going to an IDO or going through to the traditional VC route. And I think that equal opportunity for everyone is really what brings a lot of people into Web3, and that's what Imbue brings. Like, it directly answers the biggest criticism or the most popular criticism of Web3, saying it lacks utility. What are you going to do with your Bitcoin? What are you going to do with Ethereum? Like, the Imbue gives people optionality that they never had, right? And to me, that is a cause worth fighting for.
That's powerful. Well, I'd wonder then, because it sounds like the benefit's not just in the hands of the business owner, but it's also in the hands of the investor, that now they have mitigated risk by being able to have multiple layers of accountability, of transparency.
Exactly. Yeah.
And on top
and that's
of
why that's why we're using the blockchain. It empowers that. It empowers that trustlessness. I don't need to verify that I don't need a third party to tell me, that this thing's done or the code's audited. I can be like, there's a milestone. Have your code audited by 2 or 3 parties. Once that's done, shows that information, and then I vote. Like, I know you can't just say you've done it. You have to convince the majority. And when you have to convince the majority of something happening, then it becomes much, much harder to lie and much, much easier to tell the truth, right? So that's really the beauty, again, the beauty of Web3.
That's the game theory brilliance behind setting the incentives in the right perspective so people can sit on the same side of the table. So then at these early stage projects, of course, the risk is admittedly higher. And that's a point where for the investor, especially when there's not, especially a proof of concept yet, maybe there's not yet, maybe it's pre-customers, pre-funding yet, it's a well-researched and well-founded, and even the team seems I think effective enough. Where do you think is, and of course there's no numerical answer, but what could an investor be asking themselves about what they think is reasonable in terms of returns for a situation like that? Like, how would an investor go between, this is a decent investment to make at this stage, or maybe I should just toss it into an index fund? It's obviously very different risk profiles, but
So I think the answer you need to make is very similar to when you're buying a coin, when you're buying a cryptocurrency, and you're like, actually, what is the potential here? What's the upside and what's the downside? What's the risk? Everything is a risk. There's also risk from the initiator, the person, the founding team, right? Do I want to build this when it's so early stages? And then what should be the return of investment that I define, right? To these people coming in, like the numbers will change depending on the market fit and the potential market size of what you're building and who the customers are and how big are the numbers of these customers. But the answer here is we have a large number of hodlers in the Web3 world, right? The only 2 options you can do with cryptocurrency seems to be hodling and trading. Like, you could go through staking and DeFi, for example, doing loans, but what we're doing here is we're using those funds and pushing an alternative to the hodl or trade, which is, instead of staking, we'll fund you. We'll give you, instead of staking rewards, you get contribution rewards. So now you're incentivized. You're naturally incentivized to contribute to projects who also give you a return of investment. And then that drives them. You instead of hodling, you're contributing, knowing your funds are safe until you see progress, but you're also getting rewards from that. And you're driving the next wave of innovation. The more stuff gets built, the more tech gets built, which means the more users, which means the value of the entire ecosystem goes up. So that, to me, is the conversation I would have with someone. It's like, oh, what's the risk? The risk is you this thing fails, but the other risk is no adoption, right? Or the lower adoption, which affects all your other assets. So it's a bigger risk to not invest in more adoption.
Yeah, and that's an interesting approach too, to be able to look at. Is going back to the network effect, and in this case here, to consider the velocity of currency. One of the major benefits here in the Web3 space is that it's not like a dollar in the fiat world that needs to go through so much red tape and checks and balances between just being sent from business to bank to be printed right back out times 10 in whatever process there is. On the other hand, in Web3, a single Bitcoin can be sliced and diced so many different ways within a single day. And I guess I wonder then, as an investor, to be looking at, well, I've got an option of staking, I've got an option of hodling. and I have an option of creating value and generating not just a return, because of course there's various utility tokens we're talking about, but being able to accelerate the velocity by which value is being transferred. Then what are the red flags is not quite the word, but the warning signs that one could look at to determine that, okay, well, this is probably not going to be the best as from a velocity value creation standpoint versus something that, from a fundamental standpoint, this really could get there. I guess in layman's sense, how would one be able to determine that as an investor?
So when you look at a project, you have to look at who the team are and their likelihood of success. But at the same time, you have to accept the responsibility. You have to accept the responsibility that this project will die or will not succeed. So what you do is look at how much they're asking for upfront and look at their milestones, right? So if they're asking for very little upfront, that means they're very confident that they can deliver, right? They can deliver at least on the first milestone. So I actually would prefer if projects had asked for very little upfront and had as many milestones, because that milestone means progress, means iteration, means they're actually moving towards the right direction. And to me, the milestone is the protection for the investor. So it's okay to invest in a project you really like, but you only have, say, 1% of your investment or 5% or 10% of investment really at risk at the start. And then the majority of your investment is saved until actual, actionable, demonstrable progress is made. So yeah, that to me is what Imbue is supposed to be building protection for investors. While at the moment, there is no protection. You buy a token in an IDO and there's no guarantee that actually it succeeds or not, right?
So what this does is it gives investors an ability to, where I guess if I take the same relation of you can hodl, you can stake for the most part, majority of the options. Here we're saying, well, if you're going to hodl, in this case here, you don't know what's happening with where you're hodling. It is a bit of a hopium there. And even when it comes to staking, it's a bit more the case. Maybe we have some passive metrics to be able to analyze. But on the other hand, with what we're looking at with the contribution model, you had an excellent phrase I heard you say about how you break down this process of milestones and what was that word that you used?
Iterative?
Say it again.
Iterative?
Not iterative. It was more on the side of, I would call it a bounty system, where you've got projects that need to be done, and there's a certain amount of cost.
Oh, briefs, the tendering process.
The tendering process, yes. So here in this case, it's like you've got hodling, or you've got this tendering process that is transparent. It's open. You can not just, maybe it's still a pseudonym that's behind the person, but you can know what is that pseudonym doing, what values.
So you can highlight. So the way the tendering process we're building is supposed to work is there's just so much interest in the Web2 space about exploring Web3, and they don't even know where to start. They don't know where to begin.
And there's a lot of directions.
Right. And there's lack of expertise, lack of knowledge, there's lack of resources. What Imbue allows them to do is saying, you know what, we're a big brand. We're going to submit a brief. We want this particular thing built, or this product built, or even this NFT made, right? Or this collection of NFTs to be made. And this is our budget. It then allows them, to anyone in the world, to submit proposals against that particular brief and get funded. And the people know that in the event that they get to choose the most attractive proposal, and they know that in the event that this person can deliver, their funds are safe. They can raise a vote of no confidence and get their funds returned. It's exactly the same foundation that Imbue has for crowdfunding. Same engines being used for funding of briefs.
It sounds like this is adding value, not just on the investor side of things, but it's also when we talk about the acceleration of blockchain, which is really in
exactly our ethos.
The most important part of interoperability is because, unlike with email, if Gmail users couldn't connect with Yahoo users, we probably wouldn't be seeing the same.
Absolutely.
I know it's interesting. In the Philippines, they have multiple cell providers or mobile providers, and they aren't able to interoperate with each other.
Wow.
And in the States, that's wild to me to imagine that AT&T users aren't able to call Verizon users, and even the phone numbers are different in the way that they're
Yeah,
set
that's
up.
crazy. I didn't know that.
It's so interesting to find, and in person, it also makes it to where it can be tougher to interact. In the States, if you ask for somebody's number and you send them a text message, you know that they're going to get it. By
Mm.
not having that, it makes it to where there's a bit of a delay in communications. And it was fascinating to compare that and to go from living in the Philippines for a year and a half, go to the States, and to see how it's that's a very, very small component that, you know what, I bet most people in the Philippines I've met, they haven't thought too much of that. And most people
Yes.
in the States I've met, they've never considered if that's the case. So it's
Mm.
almost like this standardized, not a divide, but that there's a different way of doing things with a different set of results. Yet if one has not actually experienced that yet, it doesn't even just seem foreign. It just is a thought that doesn't even
Never
process.
comes. It never occurs to you. Never occurs
Yeah.
to you. Yeah.
So I guess I wonder then, when it comes down to Web3 and looking at how in a decentralized and collaborative community approach, now that we've got a great breakdown from you on how to pick an excellent leader, how to be able to understand what kind of community may be the most likely to support a project to its completion, then I guess I would wonder from the standpoint of a product that actually adds value to a market, to add that utility that we're looking for in most projects. What do you find is, I guess, the best ways to be able to encourage the growth towards actual effective impact on the world?
Yeah, I mean, I start my every time I look at a project, I always start with the why. How will this impact people's lives? Is it only helping people already in crypto? Or does it actually look at helping people outside of crypto? Does it disrupt industries? Does it improve the lifestyle of someone, right? And to me, if that question isn't clear, if that vision isn't clear, then it's not something I personally would look at being interested in, because I want to think of not just the next year or two, but the next 5 years, the next 10 years. How do you really change and have that shift in mindset of convincing someone who has just no interest in Web3 at all, or cryptocurrency? Like, what's the point? I want to look at that person and say, well, it helps this person, or it helps him, or it helps her, and they don't have the option otherwise. Like, we have to acknowledge the underlying issue with the global financial system. It is discriminatory. Depending on where you're from, it is discriminatory. And unfortunately, rightly or wrongly, that's just the case. And when we define as mainstream, mainstream isn't, what the West and, North America. It's the majority of the human population, right? And not all the projects in Web3 are meant to help the majority of them. And that's okay. But for me personally, what I get excited about are the ones that have applications to help other people. And yeah, that's what I would personally look at.
Powerful. Well, it's one of the things I think connected with us. And I've got a few last questions before we wrap this up and take a look at. I realized I didn't share the link with anybody. So I think some of our close friends have probably found us, and I would guess that there's something. But either way, we will see if there's any questions. And regardless, it's something where
I'll check now. I'll check.
Fantastic. So yeah, it's something where I wonder, when it comes down to this concept of the discriminatory practices, not just in Web3 but in tech in general. You and I are both brothers, so for sure, I know when I think of discrimination, I typically think black versus white. Yet it was deeply saddening to me when I kind of popped and got out of the bubble of the U.S. and realized that, wait a second, we are the vast minority. U.S., UK.
Yeah.
The fact is, you and I, if I compare that to my friends in Ukraine, that unfortunately, you take a web developer in Cincinnati, Ohio, and a web developer in Ivano-Frankivsk, unfortunately, they're just not going to be likely paid the same.
No
even
way.
if they're hired from the same remote area.
Even if they're working on the same job, they're not.
And that's
They're literally doing the same tickets, they're in the same team, and they're contributing the same way. They're valued differently based on their location. And I just don't think that's acceptable. That's the reality of life. Both of them have different living standards. Both of them have, because where they live, unfortunately, that's the case. Rent in one place is not the same as rent in another. And then companies are like, you know what, you don't need this much to live comfortably.
It's the worst question. How much do you need as a company?
Exactly.
As opposed to, well, how much value can you provide?
Yeah, it should be based on the value, not based on your location. But the sad truth is, right now, it is based on the location, and it absolutely shouldn't be.
Well, I'm glad that there's people like yourself that are going after this. And I guess before we go, especially knowing that one of the big missing opportunities where I see so many great minds within the Web3 space that, perhaps they're dipping their toe in the water in different projects and playing with different technologies. But I hear it across the board that what projects are usually missing is quality proposals. Yet alternatively, I also hear from the professionals that they're looking for opportunities. So I wanted to see, from yourself, having been successfully on both sides, having closed multiple grants and having supported many, many people at rising up. I mean, there's hundreds of people under your overall coaching within the Substrate dev community. What are those, like, what is that breakdown of what is a good proposal in your mind? Or at least what are those elements of a proposal that a professional, a developer, a designer, whoever might want to submit something to a project, what would they need to have to call that a complete, highly likely to add value type proposal?
So it's impossible to know that from day one, right? It's okay to come up with a goal, a vision, or a goal that you want to build, and you don't know the how. Then you know the why, but you don't know the how, and that's still okay, right? The how in this space is no one's going to know it from the start, because it's the fact that it's
definitely going to change along the way.
Yeah, it's going to change along the way, and then you're going to pivot, and that's okay. It's the why. So we go back to my previous answer about knowing who you want to help and why. And if I find like someone who has that clear goal of why they're doing something, then it doesn't matter how they do it, because I know they'll get there. And that's someone I would support. It's the same in the Substrate developer group, where you get people who tell you, look, I'm facing this particular bug. And you realize from the questions people are asking, they're just trying to figure out why, what they're trying to do, not how they're doing it, but what. And they want to know what you're trying to do and why you're doing it, because you might not need to actually do that at all. But so instead of just telling me about the bug you're getting, what are you trying to do and why you're trying to do it, allows me to help you better, right? So the same applies with proposals. You will get a lot of people here, investors, that would hear pitches, and they always come down to why are you doing this and how you're doing it, rather than how. They definitely ask the how. Eventually they ask the how, but it's always the why and the what first.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, I know I've done my best here to give you some, I guess, non-intuitive questions here.
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. What questions do you think are not being asked enough when it comes to how either investors are making, let's start with that, with how investors are making decisions and choosing a project? What questions do you see people aren't usually asking?
How much is implemented?
Oh, okay.
Right. So I want people to, when they're coming into projects and they hear about all this marketing and all this amazing white paper, I want people to ask, has this white paper actually been reviewed by a tech organization? Is it feasible? Is it possible? Because a lot of the times they aren't. They're just not even possible, right? So I want people to ask, what's the progress? What can I see? Where's the actionable progress? I want to know how much you raised and what have you done with that. I want transparency. And that's, again, accountability and transparency. I want people to be held accountable for their promises. And that's what a white paper is, a really well thought out idea, but it's a promise. I'll be building this. So I want people to ask why. I'd love it if everyone in our community, just for every comment or decision I make, I want them to just hammer me with the whys.
Yeah.
Because if I don't know the why, then it shouldn't be done.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, that's what I would do.
Well, man, amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
For sure. Well, before we get heading out here, then I guess for anybody who's taken the time to watch this, thank you so much. You can check out Imbue Network. Sam is doing Twitter Spaces, I mean, I see a couple of times a month. And on top of that, we're going to be doing a lot more interaction here on, well, it's going to be the monetization playlist, but I didn't set things up properly at the beginning. So we're doing it on my personal YouTube. Part of the journey for anybody who's seeing this first podcast. So
No worries.
thank you so much
for
being
having me,
here.
Andy.